Hey everyone, Mike here. Just want to let you know that the stream that you're about to watch was recorded via the DevOps Lounge my Discord server. I'd love you to join me over there so you can ask questions during the live streams. If you want to do that, head on over to chat.learndevops.com.au. You'll be forward to Discord. I really hope that we get to connect soon. Enjoy the stream. All right then, I reckon we make a start. It's been about 6 minutes. We've given people time to kind of make a start, so they'll trickle in. So thanks for joining me at the DevOps Lounge stream here. What's the date today? So we've got the 26th of September. Awesome. So this is about this is probably like the 6th or 7th stream now. So we're getting these quite consistent across the board every Sunday and every Wednesday. I am going to be shrinking the streams on Sunday down to about an hour. So, well, actually I will do them an hour. So I want the streams on Wednesday and Sunday to be pretty consistent. So exact same time, exact same length of time, and the very, very, very similar formats as well, which will be, I will look at 2 or 3 questions that I found on Reddit that I thought were really, really interesting questions in the sort of DevOps space. And then, of course, if you want to then ask your own questions in the chat, then please feel free to do so. You're obviously having a little natter there, which is great. But really nice if we can interact and get to know each other a little bit better. So Link says, if I drop out, it's because my internet is really inconsistent on my laptop for some reason. Both of my laptops have Wi-Fi card issues. I think, oh, that's a shame. Yeah, try and work out what the actual Wi-Fi card type is in there. Maybe a driver issue, or it might just be, you might be able to swap that module out. Sometimes you can. Depends on the laptop. Okay, let's make a start here. Again, thanks for joining us, everyone. I'm going to jump into the first question here, which I've got up on the screen here. So we're just going to pop on over. Just going to get this browser set up for you. Where are we? Code structure. There it is. All right, let me zoom in on this one. All right, so we've got code structure for managing multiple customer subscriptions in Azure Infra. So what he's essentially looking at doing here is essentially, it boils down to being an MSP. So this person's question is code structure for managing multiple customers subscriptions in Azure infrastructure. They're essentially an MSP by the sound of it. So there's no real, it's a very big question, and there is no real answer that's going to be a catch-all answer. And of course, what questions really in this industry actually have an answer that's just sort of like a silver bullet, like, oh, if you just do this, it's going to be perfect and everything's going to be good. It's sort of like, just use Kubernetes, it takes care of a lot of problems, but it also introduces a lot of problems as well. So it's not just a sort of like a silver bullet answer. So it's very clear to me that this person, I believe, is actually in an MSP environment, and they're asking, how do they actually manage their modules? What do they do? So they've got all these modules that produce products. They have manage infrastructure around products, landing zones, and so on and so forth. So I can't give an answer specifically to this guy's situation, but what I can do is I can give an answer to a general sort of module organization that I find works in an MSP environment more specifically, but also sort of in any environment really. And they're just sort of some best practices around Terraform modules. So I think that what this person and most people need to do is they need to construct a very well maintained module structure that makes it very easy to compose solutions for your customers. So whether your customers are internal departments within your large enterprise or your government department, or whether you're in an MSP and those customers are actual external actual external companies, actual external entities that are running their own individual business, you want to maintain modules in a way that they can be consumed individually and that they solve a particular problem really well, and then you can compose them together like Lego in order to get an overall complete solution. So this means having modules that solve specific infrastructure problem with some very tight controls in place. So let's say we've got a WordPress solution that we offer. So we have a product where we offer managed WordPress installations. You might create a Terraform module that stands up all of the things for you. So it stands up you might have something that handles all your networking. So a separate module to the WordPress module does your VPCs, does all your internet gateways, or your transit gateways, or your security around that. It might put like a subnet with a PA firewall, in there for you, and then you have everything route through that. So, and then eventually you end up with like a VPC that's configured in the way that your company wants, with billing and all this kind of stuff, all going out into centralized environments. But you then have nothing else in the middle, and you go, right, that's like a base sort of network ready to go. So that would be one module that gets sort of VPC ready to go. Then you would create like a WordPress module, for example, because that might be the problem that you're trying to solve, is to manage WordPress. So what you would do in this module, you would set up a few subnets, a little fly in here. Woo! You would set up a few subnets for multi-AZ. You would set up all your NACLs and your security groups. You might set up a managed database via RDS. Maybe even go really far and have like a Redis cache for caching. WordPress, it can support that, provided you put the plugin in place. And you might use EFS to have that sort of shared file system for uploads and so on and so forth, depending on how you wanted to do it. But you would write that module to build all the infrastructure for you to handle that WordPress situation. So once you've got that written, you're going to want to put some really, really tight controls around that, such as semantic versioning would be the first one. So I do have a theory that I have at the moment on using something other than semantic versioning, but I won't go into that here. Semantic versioning is a classic system that many software developers know, love, and use. They know it really well. It's a 3-octet system, which means you get a major, minor, and patch version. It's 3 little octets separated by a dot, and they sort of give you an indication as to what the software might look like behind a particular version. And then when you transition from one version to another, you kind of get an idea of whether the transition is going to introduce any kind of breaking change for you. So if you head over to semver.org, so semver.org, you'll see the semantic versioning sort of, if you like, RFC, the sort of standard as to how you do semantic versioning. That's the first thing that I would recommend on modules, is that you have a semantic version in place. If you don't have a semantic version in place, you're going to have to rely on git commits, basically, git commit hashes, git just raw git tags. That could just be anything. And it makes it really, really difficult for people to know, A, was there an update? And B, what does that update do? Is it a major change? Is it a minor change? Is it just a patch? And so on and so forth. Semantic versions help you gain a bit of visibility between changes. So that's the first thing I'd recommend you do on all of your modules. The second thing is a solid documentation, and I would pop that inside of just a README file. I wouldn't go out to, I'd keep it as close to the code as possible in this particular case. I wouldn't go out to Confluence. I would keep it inside the README. And what you want in that documentation is primarily an explanation as to what problem the module solves, what things it won't do, what inputs it expects, what outputs it will give you, and what infrastructure it will build. And then people reviewing the module can determine whether it actually fits their needs. Will it actually solve the problem that they're looking for? And if you list in there a particular problem that it does not solve, then they've got the choice of either forking that module and creating their own version of it, or doing a pull request or a merge request, and so on and so forth. So solid documentation is really, really important. And the final thing I would add at the bottom of that documentation, or maybe even at the top, just to get people sort of going quickly if they're very confident that the module is correct for them, is some examples on how to actually operate that module, how to actually use that module. So an example at the top that says, actual example Terraform code. Here's how you source it. Here's how you reference a particular version. Here are the inputs, and we would yield this kind of output. So example, even just one example can be very, very powerful. So that's going to be really, really important. Good inputs with validation and description. So when you've got your variables, you may or may not know this. So when you create a module in Terraform and you create a variable, that variable acts as an input to that module. So when you call it, you can define the value to that variable. I recommend putting solid descriptions on there so that it's very clear from people looking at the code what that variable does and what it's used for, because sometimes the variable name can be hard to make it sort of obvious. If it's just AMI ID, that's sort of really, really obvious. But if it's something more convoluted than that, then you may need a good description in there that people can use in order to trying to determine what that does. And of course, validation as well. So if you know that the input needs to take an IP address, then set the validation to a regular expression that's suitable for IPv4 addresses. That way, when people are using the module and they're passing in something that doesn't match the correct IPv4 regular expression, they're getting knocked back straight away. So Terraform will try and compile that code and it'll knock them back. The same with outputs as well. Make sure that your outputs have got a good description on them. There's no validation on outputs, but make sure they've got a good description on them so people know what to expect from that output. Because again, the actual name of it might not actually be obvious. I would say that you should also lock down that main branch. Okay, so if you're working with older repositories that already exist and you're actually going to uplift them based on this advice, that branch might be called master. We've shifted away from that to call it main. So it might be master or main, but depending on whatever it is, you want to lock that down so that virtually no one can push directly to that branch. You don't want anyone pushing directly to the branch. You want them to create another branch that they push to, and then you want to create a merge request into the master branch. And then on top of that, you then want to force merge requests and code reviews. So you force them to do a merge request from a feature branch into master, and then you force them to do a code review. So that has to be approved by someone else. They can't approve their own merge request. This brings stability and security to the module because now you've got multiple eyes looking over changes to that module, which means that customers further down the line can actually be very confident in the stability of that module. So there are definitely some very specific things I would do on the module front there. Every module should also have its own CI pipeline doing a few minimum things, in my opinion, so just a few minimum things. The first thing you should be doing right at the very beginning is probably a Terraform FMT. So that's a Terraform format, but you want to use it with the -C option as well. So you want to do a Terraform FMT -C, and that will do a check for you. And if it finds linting problems, indentation problems, poor usage of variable interpolation and things like that, the -C means that it won't change any files. It'll just exit with a non-zero exit code, which means your pipeline will fail, which is what you want to happen. If there are problems with the code, you want the pipeline to fail. The next one would be Terraform validate, which is then validating all of the syntax and that variables are all correct. FMT won't do that, but validate will look to make sure that you're not referencing variables that don't exist. FMT just looks at the style of the code, whereas validate will check the actual code is valid and actually will compile down into something that Terraform can accept and work with. And if possible, try and work in a full apply destroy cycle. If you can get a full apply and destroy cycle in for that module where you just consume it, you build out that module, you test it, and then you destroy it again. That's really, really powerful because the thing is, even if your Terraform code passes an FMT and it passes a validate, that doesn't mean that the values that you're feeding in are values that AWS's API are going to be happy with. For example, the AMI ID to an EC2 instance, I don't believe the provider for AWS will actually check that ID to make sure it matches a regular expression or is valid. It'll just take it and go, okay, as long as it's a string, it'll just take it. And then it will pass it through. And then obviously the AWS API will then say, I don't know what ABC123 is. So you want to make sure that even though the module is syntactically correct, you want to make sure that given certain values, especially default values, you want to make sure that an apply does work when it hits the AWS or the GCP or the Azure API. So that's just something that you can do there to make the modules really, really watertight inside of a CI pipeline. And then if you really want to lock them down, you can do some static code analysis too with something like TFSec. So you can throw TFSec in there. You can get TFSec to just analyze that code for potential security problems, potential code that's doing negative things from a security perspective, and it can go ahead and warn you and ideally stop the pipeline to say, hey, you shouldn't be doing this with this security code, you should be doing this instead. So that's always very, very powerful. And then finally, there's one more thing you can do then in this sort of MSP environment or where you're serving customers is for the customer build outs, you can then consume the relevant modules inside of another repository, and that repository will essentially represent state, and it will build out everything and it will all go live. And then there's a few things you can do there to really bring a lot of stability. The first thing you can do is you can pin down the module versions that you're consuming. So if you've got your VPC module, then you've got this WordPress module on there that we discussed earlier, and then you might have a couple of other modules that do things like Splunk or New Relic and store all this stuff for you. You want to pin down to a particular version. So if they're all on version 1, pin to version 1, and then when version 2 comes out, it won't affect this customer until you want to actually upgrade the modules directly to the new version. That's pretty important. You don't want a breaking change to come through and break all of your customers. So you want to pin to that particular version. You can also define the Terraform version that you want to work with as well. So it's pretty important that you pin down that Terraform version that you're using. What this does, it prevents accidental, essentially, version upgrades. So when you run Terraform apply and it all finishes, the state file will have in it the minimum version of Terraform that is required to operate that state. If someone else comes along and uses a newer version, the actual state is upgraded to that newer version. And then the previous engineer who is using the next one down can no longer manage that state. They have to upgrade their Terraform in order to match. So you want to lock down that Terraform version 2 in order to prevent that awkward situation where everyone else has to then upgrade the entire stack to manage that state because one person used a slightly newer version locally on the system, which is also why CI pipelines are very powerful. If you're not running Terraform locally and you're doing it inside of a CI pipeline, then what you're effectively doing is getting rid of all of that risk, because the CI pipeline's Terraform version is locked in place. It's never going to upgrade unless you upgrade it. So that's a very powerful way of also bringing a lot of stability to the code base. And then finally, the provider version as well. So if you're pulling in the AWS provider, you can lock down to a specific version there too. So I recommend that you do that in order to ensure that you're effectively just getting specific features that you want. It's all working fine. You're like, right, that's great. So unless a new feature comes along that we really need, or there's a serious security update or any security update, then we're not gonna upgrade that AWS provider at all. We're going to always download and use this very specific version of the AWS, for example, provider. And again, that just introduces stability. You don't want to change to that provider to break your code going forward and therefore break your customers. So look, there's a lot more you can do. I can keep going on this, but obviously we're limited in time, and also in this particular case with this poster here on Reddit, we don't know who his customers are, what he's building. We've got a rough idea of what he's building here. We know that he's got multiple customers varying between IaaS and PaaS, so that makes it more complicated straight away. And so that's what I've given there is some general advice around how you can actually prepare a code base for management and making sure it stays stable. But I mean, there's going to be a lot of leeway in this with regards to how you actually go about doing this based on the environment that you're in. So yeah, well, there's that. Link is, are you still, yeah, okay. On the topic of Semvar on Git commits, making your Semvar release just a version Git tag is the best way, in my opinion. Then just have it automatically release on the tag CIC. That's what I do. Nice, yeah. So when you create a Semvar, you then tag a particular commit, and then the tag is just the Semvar version. That's what I do. So I just do tag version 100 on the very latest commit, and then that tag just points to that commit, and then that's your semantic version, and that essentially just becomes your release. There's my big brain question here. It was actually quite a while ago when I answered this, and so I went into a lot more detail on the question. So I'll just pop that in the chat actually. Let's have a look. So there's the actual thing in the chat there, and then you can see I had quite a meaty conversation with this individual then, and we went on for quite a while. A few other people piped in as well. So it was quite a big topic, but it's quite a hard one as well. It's not easy to get something like that right. Not easy at all. How do you guys organize your Terraform modules? Do you do anything specifically? Are you using Terraform? Never used it. Okay. I just don't have a need for it, or is it something that maybe don't have a need for it, or you just haven't got around to it, or a little fly? How annoying. I'm just a software developer who uses DevOps to automate stuff. I haven't needed it so far. Okay, fair enough. Yeah, that's fair enough. Are you doing DevOps in your organization? A hobbyist developer. Very cool. Very cool indeed. You use Chef, Amit. You use Chef. Okay, fair enough. Chef is pretty powerful. I'm not a fan. I've used it in the past, but it's been a very long time. It could have improved vastly since I used Chef. It probably has. been quite a while since I've used Chef, actually. Now that I think about it, probably several years. All right, what's this next question that we've got here? All right, yeah, so this one is a relatively interesting one. Let's have a look. All right, I can see, won't move on just yet because I can see a few people here. Still the link's still typing, so I'll let you guys pop out a few questions first, and then we'll move on to the next. We'll move on to the next actual stored away question that I've got on here. Where are you from then, Amit? If you don't mind sharing any additional details, do you work for a large organization, or are you quite big, or are you a bit of a startup? Or I know most of my viewership's in the US, so but it can be difficult to actually determine where people are sometimes. I need to get a little bit of background music going, I think, just when I have these, just me on the screen here. Just something a little bit to fill the dead air. I think that would be nice. I'm from India. I'm working for a hosting company, one.com from Denmark. Wow, cool. Wow, it's late for you, Amit. Really late for you, isn't it? Is it like 6 o'clock, 4 o'clock in the morning or something? I've got India up here on my Savvy time, actually. Oh, 7:30 a.m. Oh, that's not bad. Yeah, okay, 7:30 a.m. That's not too bad. So you're an early riser. That's good. You're in India. Yeah, okay. Yeah. Cool. All right, let's see what our next question is here. So Link says, I mostly do real-time 3D graphic systems engineering and embedded. So a lot of the tool details don't show up in these domains. Yeah, that's right. That would make sense. Yeah. So I do a lot of other types of software development. Maybe there'll be more stuff, more useful if I ever do web dev or high availability servers. Yeah. It sounds like you're doing, like sort of localized systems programming in 3D, which always runs locally. Big fan of the DevOps Lounge. Thanks, Amit. Yeah, awesome. I'm hoping it's useful. That's what it's here for. Here to sort of drive some knowledge sharing and stuff like that. So hopefully that's what's happening. All right, let's have a look at this next question we've got here. So I've got this up, and it's should AWS CloudFormation be used to create baseline EC2 instances, or should it create production ready instances? So the question's a little sort of, he says, sorry if the title is unclear. It sort of is. Currently using CloudFormation template to deploy Tableau server on EC2 instance. Everything is currently baked in the template, such as creating the instance, joining the domain, tagging resources, installing the application, activating and initializing it. So I sort of see where this person is coming from here with regards to this question. And so what I believe this person actually needs here is they need to bake their own AMI. They need to create a custom AMI. So it sounds as though this person needs to sit down with my favorite tool for doing this, and that is HashiCorp Packer. It's the only real way to get this done. It's the most popular tool, and it's the best tool to get this done. So let's describe the problem. So he's got to install some software. He's got to stand up an EC2 instance, and then he's got to install some software on there. So what does that mean? Well, it means that every time he's running his CloudFormation stack, what's going to happen is he's got to run that same script every single time, and it does everything. It installs everything. It's going to be extremely time consuming. It's not really going to be that ideal running this script every single time. It's going to be very, very slow. So I would recommend that he checks out, or I recommend that they check out HashiCorp Packer, because it's simply designed to pre-bake an AMI for you. Now, why would you want to do this? So what you want to do is you want to build an AMI because it's basically going to pre-bake as much of the software and the configuration into it as much as possible. So you want to actually deploy the actual software itself. So in this case, it's Tableau server, but it could also be WordPress, could be Drupal, it could be Redis, it could be Postgres, it could be MySQL, it could be SQL Server, it could be your own custom app. It could just be absolutely anything. So you can put almost anything inside of this image ahead of time. You can also put security tools in place as well. So if you're on Linux, you'd look at things like fail to ban. If you're using SSH to manage the servers, you'd put fail to ban in place. It can actually do more than SSH. It's not just SSH, but by default, that's what it does. And that's going to sort of very, very drastically reduce the amount of automated attacks against port 22 on your Linux host. Or if you're on a Windows server, you might use it you might want to pre-bake automatically the Windows Firewall and Windows Defender And you might want to automatically turn them on, and you might want to configure them and automatically block certain ports or enable certain ports and so on and so forth. And you can also put other things in there as well, like debugging tools. So on Linux, you might want to install HTOP on top of your Linux system so that if you're SSHing in and you're analyzing the usage of your custom software, maybe in the very early days, you can use HTOP to sort of get an idea of what that looks like. What's the CPU usage? What's the RAM usage, disk, network, and so on and so forth? How many processors have you got? You might want to do S tracing. And so you can pre-bake those things into the AMI so that when you're standing it up, you can then connect and you can analyze the application. And then, of course, in the future, when you don't need to do that anymore, or you externalize that and you pull that information out instead into an external system so you don't need to SSH in anymore, you then update the AMI to take away those tools for security purposes. And so you drastically reduce the sort of security vectors and attack points, minimize the amount that you've got installed, and you just have in there what you need in there. So overall, the idea is to bring stability to the process of delivering software. Okay, so DevOps is about software delivery. It's about ideation. It's about planning. It's about constructing an idea of what you want, then planning it down, breaking it down, then writing software, then delivering the software, then measuring the software and measuring the customer's feedback, and then looping all the way back around again and just continuing that cycle. But one of the other things that DevOps does for us, I've got Terraform on the brain. One of the other things that DevOps does for us is it brings us stability to the delivery of the software. And inside of that concept, you've got things like pre-baked AMIs, or golden images as they're traditionally called. So you want to pre-bake as much as you can into an Amazon machine image and AMI so that you're bringing stability to the process. You're removing human error, but you're also speeding things up as well. So in this case, essentially what I wouldn't do is I wouldn't use CloudFormation for anything, quite frankly. I don't really like CloudFormation. Don't think it's really that good. I'd use Terraform as far better. Terraform was far better in the long run, but this individual is using CloudFormation, so unfortunately that might not be an option for them. It's certainly not an option for everyone. I wouldn't pack any shell scripts into the CloudFormation, including the domain join stuff as well. I would have the ability for the domain joining to be baked into the AMI as well, so that when a compute resource like an EC2 instance is created from the AMI and then it boots and the cloud init process triggers, I would have that script pre-baked in, discovers where it is, how to join a domain, talks to particular DNS records, and so on and so forth, to then work out how it then connects to the domain and join that domain. So that's how I would go about doing that. So in this case, it sounds to me like this particular user, this Maxo Random, needs to be pre-baking some AMIs ahead of time rather than running this script over and over and over. It's going to be very, very time consuming and very, very slow. Yes, Amazon machine image. I see Ninja sort of listening, but passively through other people. Very, very interesting approach. Does anyone, how many of you, well, a link, I mean, I assume you're probably not using AWS because you're not really doing any sort of web dev or cloudy stuff. What about you, Amit? Are you using AWS at all? Stubborn Texan, right? No public cloud. Oh, okay. So just like sort of on-prem then? A lot of people go on-prem these days. You have your own DC. Yeah, okay. Let's scroll up a little bit. You said, so you actually work for and operate one.com. Is that right? Is that what you were saying? One.com. Yes. Wow. Let's have a look. One.com. Build your dream online. So website tools, hosting, and personalized email all in one. Wow. Excellent. So you kickstart your success today by registering the perfect domain name. Build, grow. Excellent. Okay. So is one.com attempt to be sort of like looking at challenging Wix and Squarespace, or did it come first or did it come after? Stuff like that. It's very interesting. Welcome back, ADV. Got your networking sorted? Do you like my little workbench I got going here? If you can guess what this is, can you guess what this is there? This little thing, this little, but you can't guess what that is. I'd be amazed if you can guess what that is. It doesn't have to be exactly what it is, but sort of roughly what do you think it is? Stubborn Text. I'm working on an AWS lab now through my college, troubleshooting why my LAMP stack isn't working properly. That's okay. So sorry for the slow response. That's okay. Don't worry about that. That sounds fun. That sounds good. So troubleshooting my LAMP stack. Okay, so they've got you building a LAMP stack inside of AWS. Is that on a? So that's obviously Linux, Apache, MySQL, and PHP, but it can also be Linux, Apache, MySQL, and Python, I guess. It's probably going to be PHP, I would imagine. Are you putting that on a single instance, or are you splitting that out? Have they got you putting MySQL on a different box? Or have they got you, are you using PHP FPM, which can actually be operated over TCP on a different box as well, so your PHP engine? It could be Perl. That would be, oh my God. LOL smiley face. Yeah, Perl. Yeah, okay. Let's hope it's not Perl. I mean, it's been confirmed that it's not, but let's hope that's not a thing. God, the LAMP stack. Do you remember? Does anyone remember back in the day when they used to have? You used to be able to set up the LAMP stack. I remember you used to download this app for Windows and you'd run it, and it would set up the whole LAMP stack for you locally on your Windows system. What was that called? It was called like LAMP Guru or something. It basically ran everything for you on the Windows box, and then you could then hack away. And I remember having a book that was like how to write software, how to write your own website with the LAMP stack. WAMP, that's it. XAMPP I've used. Yeah, nice one, mate. Yeah, well remembered. WAMP, yeah, I remember that. Yeah, it was basically Windows, Apache, MySQL, PHP. That was cool. I used to use that, and I used to have a book that was that would take you through building like a blog, and you would go through this book and you'd build this blog, and obviously all in PHP, and it was all in Windows, and I was using like Notepad++ back in the day, and God, oh my God, I remember that. It brings back memories. I'm an old man now, so yeah, we get nostalgic. God, what, like the LAMP stack, I wonder how popular that still is. I think it's probably still quite popular. Like literally, like in production, like people standing up new environments. I wonder how much of the LAMP stack is actually used in this day and age. I wonder if there's a way we can actually, find out LAMP stack popularity, LAMP stack history. Oh, it's everywhere, but it's everywhere, but developers hate it. Okay, let's have a look. Let's see if we can. Yeah. Given some well-deserved appreciation to the LAMP stack, a key building block of the modern-day internet that you use daily. It's everywhere. It may never die. Okay, it's quite a long post. I'm obviously not going to sit here reading it. 1995. Okay, let's have a think. 1 second. I was 11. Yeah, I would have been using it roughly in about 19. So I was 11, and I learned how to program when I was about 11, 12. And what I used to actually do was go to a local college that my dad used to take me to, because they had an internet connection. And that meant that, and I didn't have an internet connection at home, couldn't afford it. I was only a kid. So then that meant that I met a few people, and I remember I met this gentleman, David, who worked at the college, and he was programming at the time. He was programming JavaScript. And I said to him, what is it you're doing? And he introduced me. And that's how I actually fell into programming at about 11, 12. And then eventually it was like JavaScript, HTML. I was building simple websites. And then eventually I realized that I learned a very simple networking, and I realized that there must be something at the other end of this cable. Like when I'm visiting a web page, I don't understand what the browser is actually doing, because the web page clearly isn't on my local system. So therefore, where is it? And then obviously it's on a web server. And then of course, what's a web server? And then off you go. And so yeah, the LAMP stack, PHP and MySQL. I don't think I had this one, the PHP and MySQL web database application. I don't think I had that. But I did have something similar, like in the same sort of vein. But God, yeah, the LAMP stack is probably critical to what we have today on the internet, right? Facebook. It's the original. Facebook's reliance on a LAMP stack in its initial form has largely led to many efforts to modernize the PHP language to match its massive scale. Pretty certain Facebook has its own PHP implementation now, its own engine. They needed such extreme levels of efficiency that they, hack. That's right. Yeah, they created their own. They essentially created their own language. Facebook hack affected 7.3 million Australian accounts. Not quite what I was looking for there. Thanks, Google. Hack programming language. Hack is a programming language for the hip-hop virtual machine, HHVM, created by Facebook as a dialect of PHP. The language implementation is open source, licensed under the MIT license. Okay, yeah, cool. Static typing. Yeah, okay. I remember seeing something about how they really needed they needed something way more efficient, asynchronous. Do they still use it? I wonder if it's probably still heavily used, right? Well, it's more like a dialect and a fully different language. Yeah, okay. That's really cool. It is still used, yeah. Makes sense. That's really cool. I'm gonna have to check out this article. That's just awesome. Yeah. All right, so this is actually the final question here is, do you end up being tech support for the dev team? So this has been posted to the DevOps subreddit. Do you end up being tech support for the dev team? The number of times I end up troubleshooting a dev's computer issues is getting too damn high. It's obviously that meme of the guy holding up his fists. So it is a good question, actually. I think that if you're in an environment and your title is DevOps, or that environment claims to be a DevOps environment, and you're doing localized system support for your developers, and you're looking after their laptops, it's possible that you're either in a really bad environment that's just really messy and everyone just sort of gets on with everything and it's not really well structured, or you could be actually in a startup. If you're in a startup environment, everyone just sort of needs to just learn to do everything. It's the nature of it. There's 10 of you, but you've got to maintain your laptops, your local network inside the office. Someone's got to set that up. Someone's got to set up the LAN. Everyone's got to be systems administrators, QA, devs. That's the great thing about working at very small startups, is that there's a lot to do and there's a lot to learn. I think when you get up to a much higher scale, if you're in an organization, like my current client has about 20,000 employees. If I went into my current client as a DevOps engineer, which is what I do, and they started asking me to troubleshoot people's laptops, I would walk away, because that essentially isn't what my role is as a DevOps engineer. Looking at the sort of the right side of the whole process, which is more the automation and the tooling and the technology deployment, versus the human people skills on the on the left. Tech support for the developers shouldn't even actually come into it whatsoever. Let's check out what some other people are saying. So I fixed this by creating a VM image that had all the builds and the dev tools in it. Since the dev image can compile, and you fix a whole new image. Devs get clever with bullshit workflows, and then you fix a whole new image. Okay. Interesting. Devs who can't fix their own computers. Geez, yeah, that's an interesting point, actually. Why can't they actually fix their own computer? Did I upvote this? I didn't, did I? Yes, all the time. If often get pulled in when newly deployed services aren't working, and it's usually just some configuration variable missing somewhere. Yeah, okay, I guess that's from a software perspective. They are mostly probably delegating the shitty grunt work to your team. That's probably the truth here. I would say that this person is in an environment where they are essentially being asked to do the really, really shitty work. So Link says, kind of sketchy to be a developer who can't even do basic IT or tech support. Yeah, I agree. This is why when people come to me and they say, "Oh, I want to be a DevOps engineer," one of the first things I sort of do is I say, "Okay, I have a few questions I want to ask you," and what they sort of get to is the heart of, do you know how an operating system works? You don't have to be Linus Torvalds. You just need to know how a basic operating system works. You need to know how a bit of basic hardware theory, bit of basic networking, and then on top of that, you can start writing software. And if they can't do that, then there's other things that they really need to learn before they start looking at a career as a DevOps engineer or as a software engineer. You really should know how an operating system works, the basics of how a computer works, the basics of how a network works. And I mean, like, basics. I'm not talking you need to be a CCI, Cisco certified interneting engineer. You don't need to be Linus Torvalds level, kernel level architecture knowledge. You don't have to go out and write a kernel and go, right, I understand how operating systems work now. You just need to understand enough so that you can maintain your local tools. I'd be actually quite embarrassed if I couldn't maintain my local system, just as I'd be equally as embarrassed if I hired a plumber who came into my house and he took a load of tools out of his box, and he said, I don't know how to use these. Can you help me? It's like, no. Like, that's what we've hired you for. Like, you should know how these tools work. So that is a bit nuts. Kind of like an electrical engineer needing to hire an electrician, pretty much. I mean, if you've been educated in this stuff, then you should be able to maintain your own tools. What's the biggest issue at my last gig? How do I install Docker or a CLI or set proxy vars? Yeah, and you sort of like, hang on, like you should know this stuff. I worked for an AI ML startup where all the ML engineers held PhDs. I had to explain to every one of them what SSH is and about key files. That's pretty embarrassing. I mean, okay, artificial intelligence and machine learning is probably mostly around mathematics and just pure code. So maybe they were just kept very abstracted away from it. But yeah, to be fair, most data science PhDs aren't software developers. Yeah, I agree with that one. I mean, that's not really... I mean, just because they've got PhDs doesn't mean they know everything. I actually worked with a guy who had a PhD in computer science back home in England. He had about 6 Microsoft certifications, and he was on the phone to a customer behind me. And he said to the customer, you can't set the time to live property on individual records inside of a DNS zone. You can only set a TTL on the entire zone. And I said, and after the call, I said to him, you do know that you can set a TTL on each record? And he said, you can't do that. DNS doesn't let you do that. And I had to show him. I had to log into Namecheap.com on my own personal account. I had to go into a zone and show him that I could set TTL records on individual TTL values on individual records. And this guy had a PhD in computer science. He'd never read, and he did. And I said to him, "Have you read the RFC on DNS?" I mean, I'm not reading it every week to catch up on DNS issues, but I have at least glanced at it. And he's like, "What's an RFC?" And it's kind of like, you have a PhD in computer science. I mean, that's pretty mental. So yeah, I mean, PhD doesn't mean you know everything, but I don't know. I had a systems engineer role that was focused on DevOps, but really that job title could have just been dedicated IT support guy to the dev team. Always found supporting devs challenging because until I wised up, I thought that said wished up in my head. Until I wised up, there was often a level of systems proficiency I assumed a dev would have, but often they didn't have knowledge even close to that. Most notable with network-related issues. Again, when someone's saying to me, how do I become a software developer, I get a job in IT, or become a DevOps engineer, I've got like 2 or 3 questions that I ask. And in fact, you know what? Let's ask them. I've got them here in the Discord. So they're in the professional channel. Some of our viewers aren't at that professional. They don't have that professional tag. But so you wouldn't have seen it. But I'll go over the questions. So the first one is, I'm going to compile a Go source file into a binary. Using the Linux terminal, I want you to navigate to the executable and run it. Now, I'm emphasizing some of those words because they're essentially highlighted words. And what I'm essentially saying there is, it's less a question and more like a task, but it's essentially, do you know what compiling is? Do you know what Go is? It's a programming language. Okay, what's a programming language? What's a source file? What's a binary? What's Linux? What's a terminal? How do you navigate on the terminal to an executable? What is an executable? Is it the same as a binary, perhaps? How do you run it? Show me running it. That first question tells me about whether someone can actually just operate a computer at a slightly more elevated level than, say, my mother, who can find files, create files, manage files, send emails, browse the web, and so on and so forth. But if someone wants to become a computer programmer and they can't get through, they don't know what a programming language is, they don't know what compilation is, don't know what a source file is, don't know what the difference between, they don't know what a binary is, and you don't know if is an executable the same as a binary. Is it? Might be, might not be, don't know. You tell me. How do you run it? If they can't do these things on the terminal, then they're going to struggle to learn how to program, and so they need to learn how to use the operating system. If they do know that, then what I would do then is move on to the next sort of question/task, which is, please tell me what the process ID is, how much CPU it's using, how much RAM has been allocated to the process, and what port is listening on. Is it listening for a TCP or a UDP connection? And again, highlighted words here, I'm looking for things like, what's a process? What's an ID? What's a process ID? How do you find it? what's CPU? What do I mean by it? What's a CPU? How do you measure the CPU usage of a process? What's RAM? What does it mean for RAM to be allocated? What does that actually mean? What's a port? Why does it listen on it? What does that mean? What's TCP and what's UDP? And so again, it takes it a little bit further now. It's sort of looking at how do you understand sort of operating system fundamentals and enough, even just really basic networking, such as binding to a TCP port and listening for an inbound connection. In order to be able, like, if you can't understand those concepts, then you again, you need to take a step back, and there are other things that you need to study before you consider studying a programming language, in my opinion. And then the third one, and this one's a bit vague, I'm working on this one. This is why I've not made these public yet. So the third one's a bit of a task, and it's please send an HTTPS request to the port that requests the /random URI to request a random number, and give me the HTTP response code. What's the format of the response body? What key in the documents can I find of the random number? So that's exploring things like, what is HTTPS? What is a request? What is a response? What is a response code? What is a URI? What does the /random mean? What is that? What is that inside of a URL or a URI? What is the format? In this case, it's basically the response would be a JSON. So the idea is to look at the response and go, oh, the format, that's a JSON format. Okay, cool. What's a key? When we find the key that contains the random number inside of the document, well, I know it's a JSON document, and I know if I go to this particular key, I'll see the random number that I got back from that request. And so these kind of questions give me a really, really good idea of whether someone has the fundamentals to start moving into a career in network engineering, systems administration, DevOps, programming, and so on and so forth. If they can't answer these questions, then in my opinion, they've got to take a step back, in my opinion. We've got some other things. So there's no rush here. Like, the computers aren't going anywhere. And so that's just the way I feel with regards to people coming into the industry. And I think that in bringing it back to this post, into the context of this Reddit post here, I think that if you're having to maintain basic things like environment variables connected to proxy servers and so on and so forth for a developer, that developer needs to revisit a few of the fundamentals. They definitely need to they need to learn how to use their tools so that they can then do their job. For me, I'd be quite embarrassed. ADV says, agreed. That's a big difference between what's in real life work and in academia. Agreed. Yeah. Link says, I think the open source community's software developers tend to be a lot better with computer and IT work, since they generally are very familiar to Linux. They are very familiar. Is that meant to be? Oh, familiar with Linux. Yeah, I agree. They tend to be, because they're contributing to an open source project. It's actually very likely that they're sort of working alone, right? They don't really have someone to put their hand up to and say, hey, can you come configure my laptop for me? So they've sort of just got to Google it and work it out. Whereas I think if you get a developer who comes into it's always in sort of large government or enterprise environments, and there's always an IT department there, and there's always, a dev guy, a DevOps guy, or a systems guy who can come along and do it for you. The human being at the other end of the phone becomes their Google. They just don't care. They don't want to learn it. They can just get that guy to set it up for them, and away you go, which is kind of sad, really. I mean, also, it goes hand in hand with scripting knowledge. Yeah, that's a good point, actually. If you're going to learn to use a terminal, then it goes hand in hand with learning how to actually script from script with Bash or script with shell scripting, because you're going to need to automate some of the tasks that you're doing there. So that's actually a good point. That's all I wanted to cover today, to be honest with you. 3 little simple questions there. We've got 5 minutes left before I need to jump off. Does anyone have any questions or anything they'd like me to check out? Do you want me to look at anything at all? More than happy to jump on a particular web page and have a look at something, or I give you 5-10 minutes. Entirely up to you. It's not a problem. We've got the general sort of. Let's have a look at actually what's on. Usually I do a news feature at the beginning, but I actually didn't get around to doing that. I need to get my processes a bit tighter, so I do apologize. I usually do a news thing where I look at sort of like updates from AWS, Azure, and GCP in order to bring those updates to you just very quickly at the beginning of the stream. So I'll do that next time. And I might even make it just a sort of more of a professional video, just pre-recorded, that I push out onto the channel, like maybe every Wednesday or so. Okay, let's have a look. So I'm looking for alternatives to read the docs for my OS's restructured text docs. It has the same issues as reverse stuff. Any ideas? Read the docs. Yeah, okay, so read the docs. So you're using restructured text. I'm a massive fan of MK docs, but I'm not sure if it does restructure. There's MK docs. So if you go to book.learndevops.com.au and you look at that book that I'm writing at the moment, that's all MK docs. That's all MK docs. ADV, your thoughts on Pulumi? I saw a convo on the channel a few months ago. Yeah, okay, Pulumi. That's a good question. Very good question. I don't like imperative languages for infrastructure as code. So I don't like the CDKs. So Terraform does actually have a CDK that you can use for Python. So you can write Python code and get Terraform state. I don't like it. My biggest concern with it is, and it's Pulumi or a CDK, is when you use a language like Python or Ruby or JavaScript or Go, anything, any programming language to manage infrastructure. What you find is you get a lot of power, you get a lot of flexibility, you get a lot of control. The problem is Dave, who wrote all that code, leaves, right? And then Mary comes in and she's like, yeah, I know infrastructure as code. I can do infrastructure code. Yeah, no problem. And she sits at her computer and then she goes, cool. And she starts on Monday and she opens it up and she goes, cool, where's all the Terraform code? Or even, where's all the CloudFormation? And they go, oh no, we use Pulumi, so it's all written in Haskell. Oh, okay, cool. All right, let's be fair. That's a more realistic example. We use Pulumi and it's all written in Python. Okay, cool. The immediate problem here is Dave, who wrote all this code, because he's got access to the whole Python ecosystem, can literally write anything he wants. It can be structured in any way. Does he create classes that represent EC2 instances? Or is it just flat functions? Is it in a module? Is it in a package? Maybe he's created a REST API in Flask that does all of that, and then instead at the front end you just write bits of Python to talk to the API and request things. That sounds kind of cool. It's not what the rest of the industry is doing though. So the ability to maintain that going forward is going to be extremely difficult because everyone's going to do it differently. You're not going to get company A using Python via Pulumi to produce infrastructure. It's very unlikely that if you then move into company B, started at the exact same time, building very similar infrastructures, delivering, even if they're direct competition and they're delivering managed WordPress installations, for example, or managed Kubernetes clusters with a custom monitoring dashboarding software on there. It's very unlikely that those two companies will have identical code bases. They will be extremely different because the thing with Pulumi is it lets you use multiple languages, and what comes with those multiple languages, lots of different opinions about how to do things correctly. And it's great that these languages give us this amount of flexibility, but it doesn't really scale from an infrastructure perspective. It works for software because software is extremely fluid and complicated. How would you define a language that forces you to do things in a very particular strict way, but then write a game with that language, or write a web browser with that language, or write a word processor with that language? You probably actually couldn't because the language is too strict. So it has to be very fluid. But when it comes to infrastructure, there's only really one sort of way that you should be doing infrastructure. And so the language and the tools should reflect that. So that's why I don't like Pulumi and I don't like CDKs, because it makes it difficult to then hire people on who can then maintain that stuff. Link says, I like Haskell so much more than Python. Sadly, no one uses Haskell. I've never really looked at Haskell I have looked at it. I've gone through the tutorial. It's more the functional programming that I find difficult to get my head around. I just find that it's wonderful. And I think the result is excellent. However, like you say, not many people are really doing it. You're welcome, ADV, not a problem whatsoever. I hope that was a useful explanation. There are other reasons as well, but that is the big one for me, is that you're going to be moving between organizations and your skill set is only going to transfer if they're doing something very, very similar. They're also using Pulumi. What if they're using Pulumi and they're using Ruby? You've now got to learn another language. It's not standardized. That's my biggest problem. Link says, I do stuff with PL theory and type theory, so I highly value pure functional programming and some other declarative programming. Yeah, okay. Yeah, okay. It's not useful though for any types of software I write. Yeah, that makes sense. That makes sense. So functional programming is very good for sort of algorithms, right? Sort of very mathematics based stuff where you need a function to be extremely, you put in the value and you always get the same thing out every single time. It sort of maps very well to mathematics, doesn't it? Whereas I think with imperative languages like Go and Python and Ruby and things, PHP, you get that sort of fluidity and ability to sort of do things your own way, which, like, again, I think that's required, very, very necessary for developing software. Here's MK Docs. I don't know if this would work for you, Link, but again, I've written the book in it. I'm not sure if you can do restructured text. I think it's just Markdown, I think. But maybe you can convert your restructure into Markdown. I don't know. Maybe it's got a plugin you can use that will give you the ability to use restructure. But yeah, there we go. Well, you sound very smart, Link. Way smarter than me. I don't know what any of that means. I'll stick to my infrastructure, thank you, and my CI pipelines. Sounds very impressive, though. Very impressive indeed. All right, if we have no other questions, thanks very much for joining me today. It's been very, very interesting. Again, always on the Discord, always available for questions. It doesn't have to be in the questions channel. Pop into one of the other more relevant channels if you have a sort of topic-specific question. But of course, so I'll be back on Wednesday, exact same time, Wednesday. We'll do the exact same format. We'll look at a few questions I found online, throw some questions, let's interact a little bit. And in the meantime, yeah, don't forget to keep an eye on this YouTube channel. If you go to youtube.com/c/Michael Crilly, I'll link it in a channel. You'll see that I've got a channel as well that I'm pushing a lot to. So if you want to pop a subscription on there, hit that notification bell, that'll be great. You'll get to see any future videos that we push out, including this stream as well. So this stream actually gets uploaded there as well for posterity, and it also gets sliced up into little videos, so you can link to those videos later on as well. So thanks very much, everyone. It's been an absolute pleasure. Enjoy the rest of your day. Very nice.